Beach and Chinatown shared spaces operators. Really excited to be here today. Really grateful for Nick and the Italian Athletic Club for hosting us. We're here today in partnership with Ida from North Beach Business Association and Supervisor Peskin. So with that, I just wanted to say that the presentation will be about an hour in length. We'll go over some of the design guidelines that you'll need to know about in order to apply for the legislative program, which I hope you are all on your way to do that. And then we'll provide 30 minutes for Q&A, and definitely want to make sure everybody has a chance to ask their questions and get clarifications. So with that, I'll pass the mic over to Ina.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you everyone so much for coming. I know it's really busy and hard to get away from your businesses, but this is really important that we address the shared spaces and what's going to happen moving forward. My name is Ida Zabi. I'm the president of the North Beach Business Association and the owner of Cafe Trias from the Leland Grant. And actually, to give a little background of shared spaces, shared spaces started in North Beach with Aaron here. Aaron, can you just, I'm going to ask you to give a little, before we introduce the rest of the panel, how shared spaces came about.
Thank you, Ida, and thank you to the Italian Athletic Club for hosting today, and to all of you for coming. Everybody has their own origin, mythological story, but the story that Ida just alluded to is true, or at least true for North Beach. After the hard shutdown at the beginning of the pandemic, when nobody knew what the future would hold, when I thought that this was going to be a 2 or 3 week thing that turned to be a 2 or 3 year thing, Ida was thinking ahead and asked if I could help get some barricades to barricade off 2 spots. The Cafe Trias was closed, and I implored then Captain Julian Ng to borrow a half a dozen metal barricades, and that became the prototype first shared space in North Beach. And then everybody up on the 1300 block at Grand, the 500 block at Green said, hey, that's pretty cool, we want one of those. And then everybody was outdoing each other with, do you remember Teagues, Green, AstroTurf that got rolled out. And look, we all know what the pretty challenging last 2.5 years have held. We were building the airplane as we were learning to fly the airplane, or so the cliche goes. And along the way, because an emergency had been invoked by the mayor and ratified by the Board of Supervisors, we were changing rules and making up rules quickly. And along the way, I think there was a general citywide sentiment that these parklets had become not only lifelines to businesses to survive during the pandemic, but had really become part of the urban fabric and vibrancy of our neighborhood commercial corridors. And to that end, knowing that someday the pandemic would fade into the background, the board and the mayor worked together to put together a permanent program. And that is under a number of different agencies that have shared interests in our public realm, our streets, ranging from the city planning department, that is nominally the overseeing entity, to the Department of Public Works, which is a permitting authority because the streets are under their and the Municipal Transportation Agency's jurisdiction. So you have the SFMTA planning and, of course, DPW. And then, and I think this is really, really important because many of us took a walk together with city staff, and we went to a whole bunch of different facilities, and our fire department pointed out that there are very real health and safety concerns that relate to fire, and so, which I take very seriously, relative to being able to get ladders up onto buildings, relative to the outside use of propane and where that can be done and where it can't be done and under what rules. So I really welcome what is happening today, which is to put this into English, and a couple of things are colliding. Not only is the permanent program rolling out, But the MTA, and I think we have to realize that these are separate things, but they're happening at the same time, is also working to do things to increase pedestrian safety. So daylighting of corners, which sometimes conflicts with where there are parklets. But we want to go slow. We want to say hello. We know that we've all been through a just super rough 2.5 years. And so we have prolonged the period to phase this in, but you all do need to apply, and you're about to hear from all of the agencies as to the rules. And I really appreciate your patience, and we will work with you to get it right. And with that, I will hand it back over to Ida, and I really want to thank the North Beach Business Association that helped spread the gospel of shared spaces throughout North Beach and ultimately throughout the city.
Thank you, Aaron. I'm not going to hold this up too much longer. I'm going to pass this out. Everybody, please introduce yourselves and what department you're from, and then we'll move on to the program.
Thank you, Ida. My name is Lieutenant Sai with the San Francisco Fire Department.
I'm Fatty Khoury with Public Works.
Hi everyone, I'm Robin Vaughn with the Planning Department.
Good afternoon, Monica Minowich with the SFMTA.
Hi everyone, I'm Kelly Albers with Public Works.
Good afternoon, Michael Lennon, Public Works.
All right, hi everyone, my name is, as I said earlier, Robin Abad, and I'm going to kick us off. Before I do that, I do want to thank Supervisor Peskin for his leadership as well as just those great framing opening remarks. Also want to thank Self-Help for the Elderly. Marcus and Kiefer are here, so folks who might need Chinese language translation support, Marcus and Kiefer are here to support us around that. And then, of course, Nick at the Italian Athletic Club, as well as Andy Alon, who kicked us off for putting this thing together. So I'm going to stand over here just so that I can see. And today, what we're going to do is we're going to sort of, what the next sort of 40 minutes are going to be about. Supervisor Peskin referred to legislation to make the pandemic program actually permanent, codified. So that comes with new rules, some regulations, mostly around safety and ADA access. So we'll talk about how that impacts everyone here who is operating a shared space or wants to operate a shared space in the future. Those rules also don't all go into effect at the same time. Supervisor Peskin mentioned that we're trying to go slow. It's going to be a big project to get everyone upgraded and make sure that everything is safe and accessible. So there's a way in which some rules are more urgent. There are others that we can wait to implement. Talk a little bit about what we know about who operates shared spaces, and also resources and grants to help everybody as we transition your permit from a pandemic permit to a codified permit, what resources the city has available to help you. And then Ida will help moderate a Q&A. So where are shared spaces? Most of us in North Beach are really familiar with parklets. North Beach is one of the first neighborhoods to actually host parklets starting in 2009, 2010. Tony from Tony's Pizza's here. He's one of the first ever in the city. But shared spaces also happen on sidewalks. They also happen in open lots or vacant lots. They also happen in streets. We'll sometimes close streets on a recurring basis for several days a week for several hours a day. So there's a lot of different types, and as the supervisor mentioned, there's a lot of different departments that work together to help make this happen safely. Before the pandemic, really parklets were all public assets. At the time, things like private dining, restaurant operations, merchandising, wasn't something that the city code allowed for. But the legislative effort that the mayor and the board of supervisors undertook to make the pandemic program permanent now allows for these revenue generating activities in all those different types of places, especially parklets. There are some new rules about public access, which Monica and I will talk about a little bit later. Those will go into effect in April when the pandemic program sunsets. We also want to encourage everyone to let us know if there are local heroes in your neighborhood who've been valiant in this, this period of hardship during the pandemic. Shared spaces are, sure they're parklets, and sometimes they can be really pretty and comfortable and beautiful additions to the neighborhood, but most of all, the most important thing about parklets are the people who make them happen. You are all small business entrepreneurs. Some of you have been serving your neighborhoods for decades. Some of you are legacy businesses. And we would really love to help tell those stories about how you are, in your own way, leaders of your community. So please email us. We'd love to profile heroes, more heroes in North Beach. We also really want to celebrate all of the wonderful and beautiful experiments that are happening. So we also have a Shared Spaces of the Week that goes out on our social. We are open to ideas. Please send us. Nominate yourself, nominate a friend. We're also here to tell inspiring stories about how this program has helped the city. So we know that neighborhood residents are or neighborhood businesses are very, very dependent on local residents, as well as tourists, but most San Francisco small businesses depend on local residents. Of course, here in North Beach, there's a healthy mix of tourists as well as, locals who have supported you all these years. We know that a lot of you all are really small operations, right? Margins are really tight, staff is really small. These are families and extended families running these businesses, and that's really a huge part of what informs our thinking and how we want to roll out the permanent program. We also know that folks who have decided to create parklets and to create shared spaces represent the diversity of San Francisco, and that's something that as San Franciscans we're all proud of. It's something as a program that we're really proud of. So just over half of folks who operate shared spaces are women-owned businesses. Another third identify as minority-owned or immigrant-owned. And so that makes for a resilient and vibrant business community. Right. So that's who benefits and who participates in shared spaces. I know a lot of folks are stressed about money, right? Margins are still really tight. Tourism in the city is not what it was. Our downtown visitation and downtown employment is nothing like it was 5 years ago. So making these adjustments to make sure that your parklets are accessible, that they're safe, that they provide our first responders with the ease of response time that they need. The city has had several grant programs, and there are going to be more. Shortly, later this summer, Matthew Thompson, who's back there taking video, will be announcing another round of grant applications for compliance grants. So these are going to pay for things like, diverters and barricades, or maybe you need new materials to build an ADA accessible ramp for your site. Maybe you need to hire a contractor to cut a piece of your roof off because it actually gets in the way of fire department putting up a ladder to a building. So please visit sf.gov shared-spaces-equity for more information about that and to actually apply. The application process takes about 5-7 minutes. So as I mentioned a little bit later this summer, there's about $150K left for compliance grants that we'll be announcing and then giving out. A little bit later this summer and fall, we also have funding to support arts and culture sector folks popping up, performing, doing artwork and other activations in public spaces, as well as technical assistance for some of those bigger projects like roadway closures and parking lots. Most of this presentation is going to be multilingual. Some of these slides just have pure Chinese versions, so I'll just pause on these a little bit for folks who might benefit. We're recording this session, so this will be posted, and the slides themselves will also be available for anyone who's not here, or if you want to look at them more closely, especially if English is not your second language, or it's not your first language. Daniel's getting a call. Okay. All right, so as I mentioned, there are some more grants that are coming up, some specific to arts and culture, and where we're really trying to make sure that Bay Area artists, visual artists, performers, continue to be a rich part of what happens in the out of doors. And then also technical assistance grants for things like the recurring street closures or the vacant lot activations. There's also not enough money to give everyone everything that they need in order to fix things at your site. So we just are really transparent about this up front. There's a grant program. Really where we're trying to focus are on geographies and in neighborhoods where there are the most vulnerable communities, as well as demographics that have been hardest hit by COVID-19. So I wish I had billions of dollars to fix everybody's ADA and fire safety issues, but the reality is that we have to make some hard choices in selection. So This is just a map explaining how we do our first pass in trying to prioritize money in some geographies versus others. This is the Spanish version of the slide as well as the Chinese version of the slide. Okay, so where can you go to look for support or apply for grants for either your brick and mortar business or your outdoor parklet? sf.gov/shared-spaces-equity for the parklet compliance grants and the other grants I talked about, as well as sf.gov/sf-shines. So that is money that's also available. Many of you have probably applied for those grants before to do things like accessible building entrances, to do facade improvements, and other stuff that's sort of on parcel, right? Tenant improvements to help offset many of the expenses and the costs that we need. We're just going to talk about 2 more slides and then hand it over to Monica, who's going to step us through the safety and accessibility requirements. But before I do that, just want to make one date on this slide very, very clear and apparent. November 1, 2022 is when we need a permit application submittal for folks who want to operate a parklet on or after April 23. The city's going to need those months between November 22 and March 23 to look at everyone's applications, get you the feedback that you need so that you know with more clarity what you might need to do with more specificity to make your site eligible for codify that pandemic permit. We're trying to give everyone as much time as possible, plenty of lead time, which is why Annie has organized this town hall and all of the walks and all of the other webinars and things. It's important to note too that as of March this past year, or this current year, yes, March 22, the departments are able to start charging fines and fees for violations that pertain to fire safety, emergency access, and to ADA. So for much of the pandemic, the city was going really easy on these issues, and there are a lot of issues out there with parklets in terms of accessibility and fire safety. And so as Supervisor Peskin mentioned, the city needs to start taking that really seriously, and the fire department and public works may at their discretion start citing fines and fees if we're not seeing the kind of responsiveness that we need to make sure that these are safe and accessible. And we can come back to any of these slides during the Q&A in case folks have more detailed questions. One other thing before I hand it off to Monica is that everyone who operates a shared space will be receiving what we call a single bill of health. And this is a sheet, sometimes it's double-sided because the list can be really long, that identifies everything that we believe to be at issue with your parklet. So, we might have our inspectors either from MTA, the fire department, or DPW. They've been doing rounds throughout the city through the last year, and we've been noting things like, this one isn't really ADA accessible, or this one has a roof, maybe a roof that extends so far over the sidewalk that we can't get a ladder up on the building, right? So over time we've been noting those. We're going to try and put them all in one place so that if you are a parklet sponsor, you can look at that and understand, for the most part, what you might need to fix in order to be compliant for a post-pandemic permit. It's not going to have everything that's wrong, and there might be some things on here that you already fixed, but it's a good starting point for you to start making financial decisions about what to fix when between now and March. So you'll receive this either via site visit, Lieutenant Tsai, Fatty Khoury from DPW, and another person from MTA may come visit you at your location and hand this to you with more information. We're also working to distribute this via email to everybody, so you should get one in the mail at some point in the next few months. Email that stuff all broken down. All right, so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Monica Munowich, the MTA, the Deputy Program Manager for Shared Spaces, and she'll talk about fire safety, accessibility, and some other stuff.
Thank you, Robin. I'm also going to stand, keep things interesting, easier to look back at the PowerPoint. So for those of you who haven't seen our manual online, I encourage you to take a look, download. It's great bedtime reading, very robust with all of our program requirements, all succinctly in all 30, 40 pages, illustrations about every detail of the program. I won't talk about every detail today in this presentation, but did just want to point out that it's a great resource and builds on the pre-pandemic parklet program, all the best practice city standards, and is more robust and refined to our best practices. We did not have this in the beginning of the pandemic. Like Supervisor Peskin said, we were building the plane as we were learning to fly it, so it was a lot in the making, but this is the requirements that will be part of the permanent program past April of next year. So should be your sort of guiding framework. With that, I do specifically just want to talk through the 3 areas of high priority requirements that are beginning to be enforced now. The Board of Supervisors specifically called these out in their legislation as can't wait till March 23, need to begin making those adjustments now because they are high priority safety issues around accessibility, fire safety, emergency access, and sight lines and daylighting at intersections. So I'll talk through those in particular since those are the ones, like Robin mentioned earlier, you may be getting visits, sites, kind of city staff talking you through what these look like and what they are now ahead of transitioning over. So this slide shows a photo of sort of a smattering of each of those things, and I'll spend the next couple slides going into them in more detail. But what we mean by things like emergency access and accessibility and daylighting are things like clear path of travel, that's shown on the top left, gaps between parklets, visibility above 42 inches, addresses, visibility type on the corners, crosswalks. So I'll go through all these in more detail. But just sort of a high level of the key high priority things that are enforced now, that kind of ASAP symbol at the top of the right of the slide. So in more detail, yes, all people must be able to pass safely and comfortably through streets and sidewalks. So what this looks like in practice, we have a requirement of 6 feet minimum, ideally 8 feet. Clear path of travel, so you can see in this photo between the sidewalk and the parklet, there's clearly not 6 feet. That would not be compliant. It needs to be clear, so no, even if it is 6 feet, it's sort of down the path, there's a pole or a tree, that wouldn't count. It needs to be sort of encompassed in that 6 feet envelope. This is a better example. We have 6 feet here between the sidewalk seating and adjacent to the building and at the curb. Doesn't show the diverter at each of the sidewalk, but it is a good example of the 6 feet minimum. A platform is not required to make your parklet accessible. You can provide the equivalent amenities at the sidewalk or ramp, so it sort of is one or the other, but it does have to be available at some point on the site. Another example of a high priority accessibility requirement, you have to be even with the sidewalk. We don't want to see a gap, a tripping hazard, hard for someone with a wheelchair or stroller to be able to get in, so you do have to have that flush with the sidewalk. Then to move on to fire safety, and we have Dennis in the fire department here, which is wonderful to call out. So one important requirement, 3 feet gap. That means for every 20 feet of parklet, you need to have 3 feet clear. So if your parklet's less than 20 feet, you don't need to worry about it. Anything that's over 20 feet, you're going to start needing to create those 3 foot gaps. That's critical for fire department emergency access to be able to get to the building, see the building, get a ladder through. I think we have some other great photos to show what that looks like. 3 feet clear to the sky, so you can see in this image there's a ladder, so you can't have a roof, you can't have string lighting. It does need to be 3 feet all the way up for every 20 feet of structure. A few examples of good and not good. You can see that how problematic that can be if you have parklet after parklet after parklet without a gap. A really long parklet, there's just no space to be able to quickly get something through in an emergency. So a few examples of how problematic that can be. And some more of not what you may think you're doing your 3 feet gap, but actually can be problematic. You can't have tables and chairs, you can't have a beautiful plant, you can't have string lights. So all beautiful things to have elsewhere in the parklet, just not within the 3 feet. And that includes, electric cables. We don't want to see that to the roof, so a lot of these structures have wonderful lighting, but you need to be able to have it easy to unplug, like the photo on the top left. But it is problematic when you have that hardwired connection shown on the top right, or cable ramps below, which is an accessibility and ADA issue. So some examples of how to accommodate lighting and electrical on the left, and then some where it would be problematic and sighted and would be a safety issue. Some other fire department requirements, which again are the ASAP, are the things we're looking for now. Sight lines above 42 inches. You need that for visibility for emergency response person to be able to see over and into a parklet. So no more than 42 inches tall. And yeah, this image also shows that sort of that 12 inches from the parking lane. So that also, that clearance is important for oncoming adjacent traffic. There's that fire emergency personnel over 42 inches need to keep that visible. This example has plants above that 42 inches, so that's problematic, not clear. That also is an example of showing where there's maybe a 3-foot gap, but it's not clear to the sky. There's actually a roof, so a tricky one. A good example, this one may not have a roof, but yeah, you can see it's clear above 42 inches, 3 foot, clear, and there's nothing in the way. There's no tables, there's no plants. So that's what we want to see. The address one, good example, that's one of the requirements. Low-hanging fruit, but high priority to be able to identify a location. We like to see that address on the outside, but this one, good example of the address, not so much with the 3-foot gap. It's surprisingly hard to find, like there's just so many requirements that evolved around time, so we like to point out the good and the areas of improvement. This one, yeah, no address displayed. Propane, we're San Francisco, we're cold, outdoor seating is lovely, but we need to keep us warm even in the summer months, except for today, which is lovely outside. But propane heaters are okay. You cannot be less than 5 feet from a flammable source. So we want to see that clearance 5 feet away, really important for those that have propane heaters. So good example, 5 feet from any obstruction. This one, not so much close to a roof, that would be a fire hazard. Let's see, this one allows airflow through the structure, that's great. However, it does have the above 42 inches visibility is problematic in this one, would not be good. So I will pivot. I talked about the accessibility requirements and the fire department requirements. I want to talk a little bit about the curb management piece of things, which is really what my agency looks for in assessing parklet feasibility. Our agency adopted the curb, what's called the curb management strategy in 2020, right before the pandemic. Perfect timing, great framework for this work. But it effectively is our mandate of how to prioritize space at the curb for different land uses. So it's different when you're talking about downtown FIDI versus neighborhood commercial districts, but how in neighborhood commercial districts, which is here in North Beach primarily, do you prioritize and allocate curb space? So we have this guiding framework, we have this guiding document. How does shared spaces fit in the mix? It's an additional sort of competing demand on space for movement, for loading, for parking, and the whole mix. So we go out and we assess things like color curb use, where are there green zones, that's passenger loading, where are there yellow zones, commercial loading, where are there transit boarding islands, for example. Early in the pandemic, we were able to allow parklands and things like inactive transit zones as they can service and we move into the permanent program. We're having to peel those back. So, and same with loading zones. 2 years ago, we were able to sort of see that pop up in those spaces, but as the economy is recovering and business corridors are coming more active, we're needing to reassess that as we transition to the permanent program. So these are all things that we look at, as well as daylighting, which Supervisor Peskin mentioned in his introduction. One of the high priority things that we look for right now, we want to see 8 feet clear on the far side of an intersection. So that's the exit, sort of the other side, and 20 feet at the entry side, clear, maybe already painted red, but even if it's not, there's many places where still the city is still kind of going some other intersection, but as we transition to the permanent program, we're citing those and we'll be making folks sort of make that revision. So that's what that looks like, and that's just really important for visibility around intersections as people are walking across. That additional space allows a turning vehicle to see any size and ability person cross an intersection, a little kid, someone moving slowly. So that's where those requirements come from. One of the last ones I wanted to call out, this is not, and as soon as possible, this is an April requirement, but I do want to call it out. It's a 2-space maximum, or 40 feet. This is new, and this is really to allow us to be able to balance the curve and bring out those competing needs that I mentioned before back into the puzzle of things. So we had businesses that were able to benefit. Maybe they were at a corner, maybe they had a longer stretch of sidewalk, but this is sort of, this policy will allow us to kind of bring a better ecosystem and balance to the streets. So not something, again, we're enforcing right now, but will be part of the permanent program. And with this one, sorry, I'm jumping around a lot, but this slide did want to call out another parameter that's really important that's on the April timeline, which is the 3-foot setback at the end. I mentioned the 3-foot gap in the middle. This is a different 3-foot requirement, but a very important one nonetheless, where at the end of a parklet, you have to have 3 feet clear and marked with a curb on the ground. A wheel stop is what they're called, and that allows for parklets that are back to back to have, with that 3-foot clearance, ability for emergency personnel to be able to get in between a parklet. So you don't have that long stretch of parklets between businesses. You do have to have 3 feet at the end. With that, I will pass it back over to Robin.
Thanks, Monica. All right, so I'm going to close this down. We've got about 8 or 9 more slides left, and we can hand the mic over to Ida, who's going to facilitate a Q&A. Some other rules that, again, they don't go in effect now, but it's something we want to make sure everyone is understanding about how the landscape's going to change after the pandemic program sunsets in April or March 2023. So I mentioned earlier that before the pandemic, there was only one kind of parklet. And what's shown here is a tier 1 or a type 1 parklet. These are public facilities, right? You could get takeout from one business and eat it in this parklet. You didn't have to be a patron of the sponsoring business, and that's how it worked for a long time in San Francisco and indeed many other cities. The pandemic forced us to rethink that. How can we use parklets to support economic stabilization, recovery? So now there are 2 additional types of parklets. There's a fully public one, and then there are 2 commercial types. And I'll talk in a little bit more detail about these 3 different types. They do have different permit fees associated with them. So we all know what the type 1 parklet was like because, this is what Tony's was like, for example, for many years before the pandemic. Other folks, Cafe Roma on Columbus, folks might remember that one before it was dismantled. The entire facility was open to the public pretty much 24/7. Right? And that worked for the most part. In some neighborhoods, it could be a little bit rough, but the neighborhood that had the conditions to support that use, had successful parklets. You can now build a fixed structure that obviously is available for commercial activities, for dining, for merchandising, etc. But what the board legislated starting in April 23 is that at least some part of that parklet, that type 3 parklet, does need to be accessible to the general public. So if you're a grandparent and it is a Wednesday afternoon and you're picking up your grandchild from elementary school down the street and you usually walk through the neighborhood on your way home and you pass a bunch of parklets, you can hang out there with your grandchild without having to buy a pizza, right? Without having to buy a scoop of gelato. So that some part of that parklet a bench essentially needs to be open to everyone. We can't kick them out, we can't kick people out because they're not, part of dining service, etc. So it's a little bit more of a compromise from where we were during the pandemic with where we were before the pandemic. There's also what we're calling a movable parklet, and I think we had a good image of this. So this is something that's not a fixed structure. It's a lot more flexible, the fees are less, and the idea here is that maybe you don't want to invest in the engineering and the architecture and the capital cost of building a fixed structure, right? You want something that's a little bit lower in terms of capital costs, but is also more flexible. So what the MTA can do is help allot that parking space or those parking spaces to you for periods of the week, parts of the day, hours of the day. This is also good for all the issues that Monica talked about earlier about how the curb has to serve a lot of functions, right? There's these beautiful uses like dining and outdoor activity and this kind of stuff, but then there's also loading, whether that's commercial loading or passenger loading, or even just metered parking. So the type 2 movable parklet is kind of a way for us to be able to use the curb, let's say for loading in the morning, and then on weekend evenings for dining service. And it doesn't have to, again, be as expensive as a commercial parklet. So as folks are thinking about what they might want to do next year in April, the city's tried to create more options than we had before to fit the kind of budgetary considerations, the finance considerations. Maybe you're not open 7 days a week. Maybe actually, your business, really you just want that extra capacity on weekend days, etc. Okay. So this also is reflected in the fee structure for these different types or these different tiers. Before we get into the numbers here, I just want to acknowledge that these numbers are far below what they were pre-pandemic. So the Board of Supervisors and the mayor together thought really hard about how this fee structure, just in general, could be less expensive than it was before the pandemic. So the city, the departments are subsidizing a lot of the work and the administration of the program. But you can see clearly that a fully public facility, it costs less, right? The presumption is that your bottom line, there's no revenue generation happening in that kind of facility. And we do see some sponsors continuing to do this. We've had parklets sponsored by art galleries, by the Y, by high schools and so forth, and arts institutions or public neighborhood institutions. So that's an option. But of course, as intensity of commercialization increases, then so does the fee structure. One thing I should have mentioned too is that part of the equity framework that we have for the programs is something that we also worked with, the mayor worked with the Board of Supervisors on, is that there's actually a half fee waiver. So if you are grossing in your last reportable year, 2 million or less, you actually pay half of these numbers. There are a bunch of different ideas for how to have maybe a sliding scale, a lot of which would cost more to administer than to, so you should note that as well. If you're in that bracket, you're going to pay a different rate. I mentioned public seating earlier. Every parklet, whether you're a type 1 parklet or you're a type 2 movable, type 3 commercial parklet, does need to have that open facility. So Gary Chen and Maria de Alva, who aren't with us here today, they're at the planning department, have worked on a signage system and a program. So everyone will get a public seating sign that you will affix to the part of your parklet that is available for the public. We want to make it really clear to everyone where the public portion is, right, and where the other portions of the parklet are. So expect to get your signage package once DPW signs off on your permit. You'll get the signs. We'll tell you where they should be placed in and around your site. A few more quick things. We've got, we're not a very wet place, but when it does rain, there's a lot of flooding. We have really intense periods of precipitation. Let's be honest, a lot of the way that we've built our parklets in San Francisco really makes it problematic for flooding. We don't want anyone's basements flooding, their sidewalk basements flooding, we don't want anyone's storefront their first floor storefront flooding, and we see big pools of water in and around parklets, and that's a problem. So for anyone who built a parklet before the pandemic, they're familiar with this design detail. This has actually always been a requirement in San Francisco. Just during the pandemic, we were a little bit lax about sort of inspecting around this, but this is something that's really important to fix as we approach April. Okay. So here's a really bad example. Clearly it looks like that curb there is below 6 inches tall. Most curbs, the standards, it's a 6-inch tall curb, right? Sometimes it's a lot lower. We have got funky streets. So you get water pooling, you get pests, you get hazards, you potentially get water backing up onto the sidewalk causing a hazard. Right. Here's a good example of how easy it is to ensure that we can maintain sheet flow and drainage dynamics on the street. So the manual that Monica talked about earlier has some really clear diagrams that will be really helpful for your general contractor or whoever you're working with to sort of modify your site over time to help you understand how to do that safely. Here's a type 2 movable parklet. Right, it's not, well, I guess it is, it is a fixed structure, but it's not one that has a fixed platform. And you can see that if it does rain and there's a big storm, water is going to be able to pass over the street, down the gutter, to the catch basin. So this is a really good example of one of those. Right, so that's the end of the kind of formal presentation. Thank you again, everyone, for being here. To Supervisor Peskin for his support and outreach to the North Beach and Chinatown communities. And I hand the mic to Annie. Okay.
Thank you, Robin. Just wanted to mention a couple artifacts we brought with us today before I forget, before the Q&A starts. We have another town halls open citywide, so if you had a colleague or a neighbor who couldn't make it to today's presentation, this will be virtual, and that's on August 16th. We are encouraging people to register. There's plenty of room for everyone for that. And then knowing that you'll be working soon on making some important modifications to your structure, we also have a design training that we're setting up with our colleagues at DPW, Fire, and MTA. Our first design training is going to be on August 25th, and that's going to be in person at 49 South Van Ness in the city classroom. So there's a flyer here if you're interested in registering your contractor, please take that. And just to note that anyone who attends this training, their names will be published on our website as having attended. So it's another good idea to get the word out about that. And with that, I'll run the mic around to the room for the Q&A, but do you want to facilitate or you just want me to? Okay. All right, we can start with questions. All right, Daniel.
Yeah, a couple of comments. First of all, it was brought up a while ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, that we didn't have a permit when we started doing these business build-outs in North Beach, and there was no permit process. But what we did do, we surveyed, and this is a survey of over 50 businesses. So we went around the neighborhood with the board, and we actually gathered information before we went to the supervisor and asked that we do this. So I want to put a little history back out there to add what Aaron has said earlier. So what you see out here is basically what the businesses need. And they've talked with what they've created. So I would ask, even in terms of a lot of the requirements you come up with now, if there's some flexibility and you look at it. Like the fire department has already done some flexibility with propane. It was illegal to have propane of any kind in the street before the pandemic. Now you've modified that so that you've created a regulation where that's possible. So I salute you for that. And that's something that's important in terms of access too, since that's one of the things you're doing. What? Yeah, I have a question. And I want to answer because I I've already put in 4 applications with you guys. How do you put a handicap ramp into a space that's coming off the curb without bolting it into the street, which you guys have put in the permit process illegally said that we can't do that. If we had just built a ramp there, someone puts a wheelchair on it and they slide down there and they fall off, I get sued.
Thanks, Dan.
I can take a crack at it, and then if anybody else from DPW wants to. So, Daniel, it is physically possible. It is there is a design solution to be able to do that. So, I think what would be helpful for anyone who wants to make sure that their parklet is ADA accessible, whether it's a movable parklet, right, and doesn't have a deck, or does have a deck, is to draw that up in your permit submittal. Part of what you're going to submit in your application for what you hope to have in April is a drawing. You could even submit, photos and any material that's going to help us understand how you intend to make your site accessible. And that's where once we get that, then we can interface with you about refining the facility. Yeah.
Form says specifically, cannot put anything into the street or the sidewalk that permanently stabilizes your structure.
You're right.
90% of these structures have stabilization into the street and into the sidewalk.
You're right, Daniel. So the reason, that also needs to change. Before the pandemic, the city prohibited putting mechanical attachments. That's screwing, bolting, right, epoxying anything into streets and sidewalks. So there have been many examples of parklets on slopes in different conditions where you can build them without having to screw it into the street, without having to bolt it to the sidewalk. So that is possible, and we're here to help you figure that out and how to do that. So just the reason that we really discourage that is because it's expensive to replace curbs, it's expensive to replace sidewalks, it's expensive to replace asphalt. So as a general rule, not just with parklets, the Department of Public Works and the city really discourages attaching things to the street. And we know that structurally, it's possible to build a structurally sound parklet, a structurally sound platform, without having to mechanically or physically attach it to the street. So next question.
Hi, I'm Tony Girignani. I have a few questions. One of them is, when we apply and we get approved, what's the grace period before we build? The reason why is Stockton's going to get torn up in January. So Joe's, Tony's, Tony Nick's, we have to just tear down all of our existing parklets. So if November is the date, or that you said earlier, and we submit and we get approved, can we wait to tear our parklet down and then build it after they finish the street in February, or they say 40 to 60 days? So that's one question that we have, that everybody on Stockton is wondering what we do in that with that. Can somebody answer that one? I have a few quick ones after that.
Yes, so it's a good idea to wait until after you know that there's an infrastructure project happening on your street. This is happening all over San Francisco. Sometimes our repaving programs or the sewer replacement projects have been planned for, planned, and the financing has taken like a decade, right? So what we will do when an application comes in, and this is what we did before COVID too, was to check to make sure if your street was going to get torn up sometime in the next year, and let you know so that you could make a decision. You can build it before the street's torn up. We highly advise against that because you're going to have to pull it off the street in order to facilitate repaving, sewer lateral work, utility work, whatever the case may be. So highly advise for folks to hold off if you know that there's an infrastructure project that's coming. Under your pandemic permit, you can be in place until March 31, 2020. Right.
Can a white, yellow, or red zone be relocated nearby?
That's a really great question, and pass that to Monica, but I don't know if Fadi, you had something to add to the street repaving question? Okay, here you go.
Hello, Tony. Thanks for the question. In general, there are items we will ask you to fix, whether there is a project 3 months down the road, or you're gonna rebuild in 6 months. Like the 3 feet access, keeping the 6 feet clear on the sidewalk, and whatever item the fire department has for the emergency access. So those are not gonna be impacted by any project going on. Now, I also want businesses to be mindful that even after you build a permanent structure, the city can still come in and ask you to remove it for an emergency repair. This is not staying there. We're not adopting it in there. If there is a project or emergency repair, you're gonna be thinking that you have to remove it.
Yeah, we've definitely had some situations where, you know, a sewer lateral explodes, right? Or there's the water lateral from the main in the center of the street to your building explodes, and that it can result in some damage to the parklet in order to respond to the emergency situation. So Monica can answer the question about color curbs.
Sure, I'm glad you asked. Yes, we can relocate colored curbs.
Great.
So it's not, just to be clear and just sort of be transparent about it, we have to ensure that all those other sort of priority needs are met for a shared space to be eligible. So we do have to make sure a yellow zone or a blue zone can be relocated. And if it can't, it may not be possible to have a shared space, but in most instances we look around the corner, can it be consolidated, and then to make that possible.
Can you have an electrical instead of propane heat lamp?
DPW, fire, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so electrical is not under our jurisdiction, so if you do that, you'll have to run power and you know, get a permit for that. But if you decide to go with propane, the one thing that you want to keep in mind is a roof on the structure. If you have a roof on the structure, no propane. If you build without a roof, you'll have to get a permit. It's a separate permit for the propane, and then you'll have to be mindful of how you use it. It's still going to be a 5-foot distance away from anything combustible.
Yeah, we're talking more electrical in the neighborhood to get away from the propane going electrical route. So that would be electrical permit. We'd have to pull separately from you.
No, if you go electrical, fire's not involved at all.
Yeah, so it'd be separate from you.
Yeah, completely.
Pest control, one more last question. So most pest control companies will not handle anything in a parklet. It's city. They don't want a kid grabbing it, want to be, you know, and some kid gets sick because he grabs rat poisoning out of a trap. But Parks and Recs has them all over. So will the city come in and help with that? Because
A permit application if you want to continue operating on or after April 23. So whether you're currently operating a parklet or a shared space or not, we need a fresh permit application. You need to let us know. Yeah, and that, you know, the submittal process takes like 15 minutes on the web.
I'm gonna go over to Ada.
So she's been submitting her application ever since February 1st. And there was the department she just mentioned called DAC. And she said it's supposed to be wait like maybe 2 weeks. But now it's been 2 months and there's no any updates for her. And she's just wondering, was that because of the blueprint has a problem or anything that is impeding the applications, and she just wants to know about it.
Hi, so when we receive a site plan and it appears to be non-compliant, we do send it to our disability access coordinators, which is DAC, the acronym that stands for it. And unfortunately, we do have a very long queue of applications that review all permit types within BSM. So it does take quite a while. It could be up to few months. And so if you could provide me with your business address, I could take a look at it and ensure that it is reviewed in a timely manner. Oh, here.
I have a shared space right now, and there is an inspector from Department of Public Work came by and told me to trim off the roof. He said the roof is extending too much to the sidewalk. Yeah. Do I have to wait until? Do I have to wait until the permit come out? Or should I have to do it?
Thank you, Ada. Actually, Fadi's here today, so maybe you two can connect about the specifics question, just to ensure everybody else gets time. But after, you can connect with Fadi. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, real quick, I would just say, yes, that's one of the life safety high priority issues. So for everybody, if you know there are some of those high priorities, act now. Don't wait for the single bill of health to come up, because now is the time to act. We are going to be trying to drive compliance. So if you anticipate issues with contractor availability or whatever else, it's time to put a plan in action now, so that when you do receive that single bill of health, if you do get a posting and it has a 14-day compliance period for some of these higher priority issues, you're already down the road. You've already started that process. It's not coming as a surprise. So yes, I would say start doing whatever structural things you can now, and the roof is one of those. In terms of DAC, I know they have a long queue, but if for installing the ramp to go down to street level, that would also be a resource where they can review and confirm the slopes. I said that would also be the entity that they have, the engineers and the people who are familiar with the ADA requirements, where if they review the site plan, they're the ones who can articulate the requisite slope and the clearance. Yeah, and there's also a question about wires and electric heaters. So if you are going to run wires, it ties in with the ADA compliance piece. For now, the ADA ramps, even the cord holders that are on the sidewalk, that was, I think, at the outset. Yeah, cable covers. At the outset of the pen, I think that was the preferred option, was putting those on there rather than having the cords. But in talking with disability access coordinators and MOD, the Mayor's Office on Disability, they want the wires elevated. So something else to keep into your plans, if you are going to go with electric heat, that the cord covers are going to be retired and that the wires should be elevated and run from the building.
Hi, my name is Nick Ferris. So I co-founded a farmer's market here in the neighborhood, and we applied under the Shared Spaces program. And I'm wondering, what are we going to apply for next year? What is that application? What would we apply for? And also get an idea of what costs are, because we got no money.
Sure. Hi. I think I understood your question. So it sounds like you have an application in already for a farmer's market here in North Beach?
We're on a closed street right now, the whole street.
Okay.
It's the whole street. And I'm wondering what we would apply for next year. Is it still shared spaces? What is that? And then also get an idea of what these costs are, because right now I'm not paying anything.
Sure. So the body that permits that is called ISCOT, the Interdepartmental, okay. And that same body will be permitting farmers markets, shared space roadway closures, and that fee structure, I should know off the top of my head, I think it's like $1,200 more or less. I'm blanking on it, but it's not a new fee structure. It's the same that applied pre-pandemic or for special events. So it's that, yeah, you would submit an application through the portal, and those fees should be available online if you're familiar with ISCOT. Does that help answer your question? Which application? You can submit now through Shared Spaces. we're still giving pandemic permits out, and then after, in March 23, it'll be permitted through ISCOT. It is, yeah. That's the permit application fee that in a permit is for a year, that's correct.
Hi everyone, this is Jessica. I work for Northeast Medical Services. I'm also on the board of Northeast Business Association, but my question is related to men's. So we have obviously multiple sites, including one right here on Stockton. So one of the sites that we do have, we were providing COVID-19 testing, similar to Nick's question. When it was the pandemic, we had a lot of flexibility on being able to use the sidewalk or the streets to provide COVID-19 testing, drive-through, walk-through. And then at some point, it just took out the signs, and we don't really know how to get that back. We've been trying to ask everyone, like, who do we talk to see if we can still put something out there. And there's just a lot of back and forth and like who to actually even contact about this issue, especially that's one issue that I think is important, is just like communication with the general public. And then another thing is the cost. Like, I think these things are for the community. Is there any way that we can also ask if like these things be continue to be free, because they're for the, you know, we're giving COVID-19 vaccines, or who knows what type of next pandemic will come, or we'll have to do it again. I don't want to be advocating to pay $1,200 a year to do a service for the community. So is there any way to help with that as well?
I'd love to get your contact information to follow up more explicitly on the case, but I do know that, yeah, they were ramping down. That sort of department inside of the agency that was handling that response was winding down, fortunately, because of things getting a little bit better, and that function transitioned over to the team that also permits the farmers market. So I know the team that's working on it. I know the team that used to be working on it, that again phased out. But there should still be, like, if they're being permitted through shared spaces right now, which I believe is how we've been handling those, they're still free through March. So yes, agree, there shouldn't be a fee. And I do know also there is the fee I referred to before is called the special event fee within the ISCOT model. I know there's also a lower tier, I don't know that fee off the top of my head, but it's like the community event, community organization, nonprofit, that I think you're asking for even a level. Your concern is free past March, is perhaps what I'm hearing you.
Really quick, I just want to make sure everybody gets their question.
Thank you. I just wanted to, say for the record, like, is there a way that we can communicate with your someone? Because I think I had no idea that it's still free. I've been trying to talk to a lot of people. The people we used to talk to no longer works there. It's very frustrating as someone who's trying to help the community, that it's like we can't even get answers for our own company about whether or not we can provide COVID-19 tests and vaccines.
Jessica, thank you first of all, for doing that work in the community. And yes, COVID-19 pandemic response is free, should be free, will be free in our streets and sidewalks. There should be no question about that at this time. And so let's follow up offline, because I think it's some of you have asked, with regard to the farmers market, what can we do now through April 23, and then what needs to happen afterwards, what fees kick in, what processes kick in. So let's definitely discuss, because anything pertaining to pandemic response, whether it's being permitted through shared spaces or not, should absolutely continue to be, a fee-free option for communities doing public health response. So we'll catch up afterwards.
Yeah, name's Brando Jesse, and I went through the process for the shared space, but the existing one was in a yellow zone, and the response was that the zone couldn't be moved. Is there some appeal process, or is there a way to look at that again? I'm in a very small space. It's just opening. It's called Shea Brando, Mason and Filbert, and so had previous tenants. I took over a place with a huge financial loss already, and it's very small. So the parklet actually gives me the space I need to run the business. It's a very tiny space. So in this case, I want to see what is the process for an appeal, because I've already filled out all the forms and went through the entire process and was told.
Thank you. Yeah, let's connect offline, Jesse. I wrote your business name. Can't picture it off the top of my head, the specific location and site, but there's no formal appeal process, unfortunately, but it is know that like the process was that the staff, the application came in, it's a yellow zone, it's not an automatic no, we do assess around the corner, can it be consolidated? So I want to check back on this application, this location, and my team about why that determination was made and revisit that. So let's talk offline, Jesse.
Thanks, everybody.
Hi, thanks, Andy. Nick with the Italian Athletic Club. Right outside and right out front, I've got two very lovely people who Leland's been in the neighborhood for 20 years. He sleeps there every night. I just would like to know what the kind of official city recommendations are for our homeless, unhoused individuals in parklets. Because that question was not brought up, and I know that DPW's out issuing citations for cleanliness and things like that. The bill comes to me to pay for that, and so I'm just curious if there's an official recommendation on best practice there other than cleaning up after them myself.
Nick, thanks for that question, and it's a question on a lot of our minds, not only in North Beach but all over the city. The unfortunate reality is in our city and in many cities across the country, we have a houseless issue. Folks have no place to live, and so they're sleeping in parks, they're sleeping on sidewalks. So it's also true that taking on a parklet is a huge responsibility. There's a lot of liability involved. It takes maintenance, it takes ongoing stewardship. And that remains the responsibility and the expectation. So whether the mess is coming from, folks who are sleeping there overnight or your own maybe drunk patrons. I live in a neighborhood where there's a lot of lively nightlife, and sometimes the parklet gets trashed because, folks are having a good time, whatever. So whatever the cause may be, as parklet tiers, parklet sponsors, it is your responsibility to keep it clean, to keep it well maintained. And that's part of what you sign up for when you put a parklet out on the street. I should note too that what the board legislated in April, to begin in April 2023, is the ability. You can opt into this. It's not a requirement for everyone. It depends on what neighborhood you're in. It depends on the conditions on your particular street during that particular season. You are able to close the parklet overnight. There are some specific hours. So to basically secure it against vandalism, right? I think is how the legislation is worded. So that is an option. We don't think everybody's is gonna do that. Some folks might decide that they don't need to do that in their neighborhood, but it is an option. The timing that the board legislated is between midnight and 7 a.m. So between the hours of midnight and 7 a.m., starting in April, parklets can be secured over those hours. Unfortunately, the city doesn't have, the ability to come and clean up everyone's parklets wherever the mess might be coming from. That is really something that is part of the responsibilities that everyone signs up for when they build one.
And just to clarify, Robin, really quick, can the entire parklet be gated, or do certain portions of the parklet need to be left open?
The whole site can be. So, but between the hours of 7 a.m. and 11:59 p.m., they need to be open. And again, if you're operating a commercial parklet, part of that during those daytime or open hours needs to be available to folks who aren't patrons. That's what the board decided to do this time around. Daniel, real quick.
in 2006, was established in 2009. If someone who is running a park cannot ask someone to be, is not running a business build-out, cannot ask someone to be, particularly if they're doing food service, that is a health issue. A lot of the people sitting down are mentally ill, they have problems with everything from alcohol to other drug abuse, and it interferes with business. No one wants to sit down and have food next to people who are derelicts. I'm sorry if I've offended anybody, but we need to begin to clarify, separate between public parking, the business per build-out, and the shared space program, in my opinion.
I think, Annie, we have time for one more question before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lingering questions? Rich?
Not only do I have a few questions, I have a few comments. This is more eye-opening. You've created a new department. You've created many, many rules. So you have to fund it. You're going to fund it through the people that put up the parklets, i.e. by tagging us. You have made it very difficult for us to put these parklets back up in any way, shape, or form based on your rules as non-business owners have put to us. Nobody takes into consideration over there as a business owner what we have to go through with the city, what we go through every day with our customers, with the homeless. 300 million going to 600 million for homeless, and we still deal with the same ones day in and day out. You've made no considerations for us as business owners. You've made all the considerations for you as the city with rules to collect funds. When are you going to protect us?
Is that the question?
That's a question for Aaron and the board. And I have some other comments that actually do with this.
I think we should save the last 5 minutes or so for questions. Do you have another question?
You're here to listen, and then you don't want nobody to talk. Okay. So Aaron, why are we here? Rich. Aaron's gonna answer.
We're going back to designing the plane as we're building the plane, running the plane as we build it. Here's the deal. The deal is, number one, fees have been waived. Number two, these things have to be safe and they have to be accessible. And we've strung out the permit program as long as we can. We have, the reason we're holding things like this is so everybody can know the rules of the road, what tweaks they gotta make. And as I said at the beginning, the city and these various agencies, DPW, SFMTA, Planning and Fire, as you saw the other day, are there to walk people through it, hold hands as much as possible. Some situations are really unique and different. I mean, when I was there with some employees, that when they saw it on the ground, they understood, whoa, it's very different than, you know, the plans that they get over the internet. But I am committed to spending between now and April of 2023, which, by the way, I was the guy who kicked it out another year, holding everybody's hands and getting it done right and getting it done safe. I want these things burning. I want ladders to be able to get up to the second floors of buildings. And when we rolled it all out, it was a free-for-all, and we needed that at that moment. But now, if it's here to stay, we got to do it right.
Aaron, thank you for that.
Yes, Rich.
At the forefront.
And I'm going to continue buying fish at your restaurant.
But you know, it goes back to the conversation, just like the pest control. As business owners, we can't get pest control companies to go out there and do anything. Why don't you write into some regulation that pest control companies that operate the city have to be part of that? Have to do that as business owners.
Yeah, and you know what? The reason I come to things like this is maybe we need to do a little bit of thinking with DPH about how to bring them in the loop and figure out how to add, you know, comprehensive pest control to the program.
Yeah, that's what I mean by flexibility. Are you going to make all these apartments pull out all the poles and put into the street now because the regulation has changed? Or are we going to? I mean, where are we going to line? You've already started this forum by saying this is an unfunded mandate. Basically, there's not enough money to cover these changes. So we have to come back more money, even though we're unpaid tax collectors for the city already.
Yeah, look, after doing this for 20 years, number one is all legislation is a human creation, and we amend it and we fix it as we learn along the way. Number two, I'll say another thing, which is, hey, the dirt, the sidewalks, the street, is owned by the people of San Francisco, 850,000 of us. And to the extent that, and by the way, if you go, for instance, to the flower sellers at Union Square, who have been there for generations, they pay rent. They pay market rent per square foot on that. This program actually acknowledges, I think, at a high level, the fact that folks are struggling, that we have never had, well, it's been 100 years since we've had a pandemic. And to that end, the city is actually not trying to make money off of this. This is not about, hey, you get to expand your business and have 10 more tables or whatever. We want a share of the profits, or the city wants fair market value rent. That's not the way this is working at all. As a matter of fact, as you heard from Robin, the city is actually technically losing money. Their staff time is not being covered by your fees, etc. So somewhere in there is the sweet spot. That's what we were trying to find. And by the way, if you had a ringside seat, as Ida did, to the controversial enactment of the permanent program, there was a lot of fighting between the board and the mayor. The board wanted longer time horizons and more flexibility. And I am committed to getting it right. And if I got to tweak the law along the way, I'll do it. And ideas about pest control, that's music to my ears.
Thank you, Supervisor. I think we're at time, so let's have one closing question from Tony, and then.
And let me just tell you, if the pizza's good, but if you make pizza at home and you get his dough and roll it out, it's fantastic.
We'll close it out. So I noticed there's not much street cleaners anymore because of the parklets. Is that true? And if it is true, I'd love to know where the monies were allocated, because if they weren't, that's tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in street cleaning that we don't have anymore. Can those monies be brought into the parklets and helping us build those or something like that? Because they were here, and I don't think they're any. Are they here anymore? Can you answer that?
Number one, for a long time during the pandemic, because everybody was sheltering in place, we called the whole show off. We were not ticketing people for not moving their cars. We weren't sending the street sweepers down. Now we do have the street sweepers back, but you'll see what they do. They're still running their routes, and so you'll see the street sweeper. I saw him going down Columbus Avenue. Having said that, I will tell you something that very few people know, which is San Francisco County gets screwed under the gas tax allocation in the state of California because of the way the formula works, which is based on population and miles of streets. And we happen to have lots of streets in a very condensed city. So, unlike the rest of the state that spends the other 57 counties, they spend the majority of their state gas tax money on street repaving. When we save money on not using what we use most of the gas tax for, which is street cleanliness, we move it back to street repaving. So there's your answer. And we are way behind on street repaving. Our city street repaving index is like 60-some%. It should be in the 80s.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. So I think that's a good moment to close. I know there were some follow-ups. Folks wanted to connect one-on-one with staff about some specific issues, so we want to hold time for that. I just want to thank Supervisor Peskin again, and also thank Nick here at the Italian Athletic, or the North Beach Athletic Club, for hosting. And to everyone for taking time to be here with us today. We're here to help. Please come find us afterwards so that we can make those individual connections. Have a good afternoon.